6, the environment. Now, as you all know, one of the biggest challenges we face as inhabitants of this planet is climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the oil sands cause 3 to 5 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions as conventional oil production. Now, according to a study that's just been released, commissioned by the Indigenous Environment Network and Friends of the Earth Europe, the government would be able to use the provisions of CETA to stop the European Union from bringing in regulations against high greenhouse gas emission products. In other words, the environmental pressures that are coming through the European community and elsewhere on what is considered to be dirty oil out of the tar sands, 3 to 5 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions would be shut down by the provisions of CETA that override those environmental regulations. And as we mentioned earlier, the investor-state provisions allow big corporations to use those special courts to challenge existing environmental regulations and oppose new ones. 7, arts and culture and communications. Now, the arts exemption that we sought and achieved in NAFTA has not been maintained in the CETA. Arts and culture have been put on the table for negotiations. So our arts and cultural industries could be subject to the same challenges by big multinationals backed by these infamous investor-state provisions that we see in other sectors. And that's why the Canadian Council of the Arts has expressed profound concern about what the impact would be of arts and culture being put on the table. Telecommunications has also been put on the table. Now, just up until now, Canada has maintained a policy that our telecommunications sector must be, in majority, Canadian-owned. We're not the only country that does this. So does the US, so does Australia, so does Japan, so does China. All of this ability to maintain Canadian ownership in a vital and key strategic sector, put on the table under CETA. And finally, though we could be talking about many other aspects of this agreement, is the issue of intellectual property. Now, UPOV 91 was something that Monsanto and other big corporations were pushing to go after farmers here in Canada. In the United States, it's in place, and the average award of this particular provision that forces farmers to treat seeds the way Monsanto wants it to be treated, as a private domain of Monsanto itself and other companies like it. The average award they've been able to force out of farmers in the United States is $385,000. Now, I don't know how many farmers you know, farmers that I know, would not be able to bear up against those kinds of fines. They've now put this in to this particular component of the agreement, and the National Farmers Union has expressed profound concern about what the impacts will be on our seeds over time. They also raised the issue, the National Farmers Union does, about what's happened just in comparing 2 sectors. Wheat, where the seeds have been publicly developed through our agricultural research stations, and canola, which is largely a private seedbed. Now, the cost of canola and wheat have risen about the same over the past 20 years, about 80%. But the cost of seeds have been 5 times higher with canola, the private seed, a nearly 600% price increase. These are some of the components of the CETA the government has been bringing forward. Now, they're negotiating with the European Commission, and the European Commission, of course, is beset by lobbyists from some of the most powerful transnational companies in Europe. But thankfully, under the new components of the European Union, the European Parliament is now involved. And I can tell you, having been just before Christmas into Strasbourg to meet with European parliamentarians, that there is a quite different look at trade agreements from the European parliamentarian side than there is from the European Commission. It was actually quite funny. We met with the Trade Committee, and of course on the Trade Committee in Canada, I'm the only Democrat for the moment, though after the next election I think there'll be a lot more of us. So it's mainly conservatives and liberals, and we walked into the Trade Committee with the European Union, and there in front of us was environmentalists, and there were social democrats, and there were leftists over here, and there were progressives over here. And they started questioning the conservatives. And the conservatives had a cultural shock that was quite delightful to see. All of a sudden they realized that they were no longer in the majority in that kind of meeting. And the concerns that the European parliamentarians were raising are the same kinds of concerns that so many Canadians feel. The issue that Europe has been so progressive on labor law, on environmental law, on banning GMOs, on social policy, on human rights legislation, and that none of that, not a single element of progressive policy is included in CETA, is something that concerns European parliamentarians as much as it concerns us. Because the fundamental issue is what kind of country we want. Because we've built together an enviable place in the world. We've done it together, building a network of social services that were there for all of us in our time of need. We've built a publicly funded universal health care system that is the envy of North America. And a few years ago, when Canadians were asked who the greatest Canadian in our history was, Canadians voted overwhelmingly for Tommy Douglas, the father of our Canadian universal health care system, because they believe that health care is a defining characteristic of our country, that universal public nature is something we need to defend. We've built a diversified economy that was based on creating middle-class, family-sustaining jobs. We did all that together, and now we're seeing that eroded. And the CETA agreement will do even more to erode what we have built together. So, in a sense, this is our time now to speak up. Tonight we're 100 strong. People are starting to find out about what is in the CETA elements. What are the aspects of it that we need to be concerned about. But each one of you has family and friends. You can talk to your neighbors. You can start writing letters to the local newspaper and going on online radio when you get the opportunity. Talking about these provisions of CETA, because what NAFTA damaged, CETA will ruin. And so by standing up together as Canadians, by taking that moment to make our views known, I believe we can stop this bad agreement from hurting in so many ways the fabric that we built together, and we can build a kind of Canada where everyone matters and no one's left behind. Thanks very much to all of you.